Welcome to the Million Vegan Grandmothers podcast. And I have my new favorite ethical vegan here, Jordi Casamitjana, and my beloved partner, Paul. And we're both going to be interviewing you today, Jordi. So thank you so much for being here. This is a great pleasure.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm quite excited.
So Paul and I we just downloaded your book. We've been reading Ethical Vegan before this interview, and really happy to get to know you. You're going to be on our next convergence on the 28th of April, this next month coming. And you're going to share some of your journey, your story, and how Ethical Vegan came about. I was watching an interview with you today on Vegan for the Animals, and you're being interviewed, and you were talking about how this book came about, that a publisher approached you after you won the lawsuit for ethical veganism as a philosophy. Can you share a little bit about that, or you can start wherever you like?
Well, yes, basically I am a writer now, but I never suspected I will be a writer, even I write in English since I was originally from Catalonia. I moved in the UK 30 years ago, but not in my million years I imagine I would end up being a writer. And I end up being a writer because the book I published, Ethical Vegan, A Personal and Political Journey to Change the World, made me a writer of a book, which made people interested about my writing and asked me to be a freelance writer for the vegan publications, and that's how I survive now. But that book came from my legal case. And my legal case, which happened, well, lasted for 2 years, but ended in 2020, was about what was known in the world because was the case that created the first time in history in any jurisdiction in the world the recognition of ethical veganism as a protected class. In the UK, we call it the protected philosophical belief. In the US, you call it a protected class, which means any country that has equality legislation where some things are protected, such as gender or sexual orientation, race, etc. All these are classes. We call them characteristics in the UK. So now veganism in the UK is added to those protected class. So it is illegal, unlawful to discriminate against an ethical vegan, to victimize an ethical vegan, to harass an ethical vegan. And it all happened because I won some litigation. I was fired as a vegan for an organization. I thought, well, you fire me because I'm a vegan and that's unfair. I checked the law and I realized, well, this is not a protected class. People can fire me for that, and that's wrong. However, I'm lucky to live in the UK. The legal system in the UK is quite useful for that because the Equality Act 2010 says that philosophical belief, not just religious beliefs, should be also protected. It doesn't tell you which ones, it doesn't tell you how, but it does use this word belief. The many jurisdictions don't have that. They only have religion or creed, but in the UK we have belief. And the law basically makes a distinction between what is a philosophical belief, which means non-religious belief, and a religious belief. But for each belief that is not religious, any religion will be automatically protected, but anyone that is not, there is a system to determine if it deserves protection or not. And that system is basically a judge had to look through a series of conditions, you have to show evidence, and then the judge determines in the end whether that belief is protected or not. And veganism had never been tested like that. So it was the first one, I never suspected that. So it was the first one that I would put that question to the legal system in the UK. So I had to go through the process. I went to a judge, and in 2020, in January 2020, a judge read all my evidence. I produced more than 1,200 pages of evidence. And the judge said, yeah, it fulfills overwhelmingly, use this word, overwhelmingly, all the conditions necessary for a protected belief. So yeah, veganism, ethical veganism in particular, is a protective philosophical belief under the Equality Act. So my case then continued. That was a prerequisite that needed to be passed first before my case could continue. And I was successful. So I ended up with a settlement in my favor. So it was also the first time the first person that applied that protection that had been just recognized. I then applied that protection and I was successful, and other people have done since. And because never has happened anywhere in the world, the entire world became very interested in my case. And everybody, for either side, the people that loved the idea in the people that hated the idea, especially those that hate the idea, kind of thinking, look how crazy the vegans are in the UK, that they actually protected veganism. So everybody wanted to interview me, everybody wanted to know my story, and it became kind of a huge news. Everyone in the world, more than 67 countries talked about my case. Last time I checked, that was years ago, there were more than 1,600 articles in the internet about my case. So popular that a publisher approached me. They said, you need to write a book about this. And I said, of course, yeah, if you pay me, I'll do it. But then I said, but one condition, I just don't want only to write a book about this story, which I know is what you want, but I also want to write about veganism in general, about the history of veganism, and about how I became a vegan. So these 3 books that I always wanted to write, put them all together. Perhaps I'm never going to have another chance. And the publisher said, yeah, fine. So that's Ethical Vegan. There's these 3 books together. One of them is the story of my case. And because of the book, then I've become a writer. So you see, it's all started with the legal case. And obviously the legal case is just the ultimate consequences of me becoming a vegan more than 20 years ago.
So
Well, your
Jordi,
book is fantastic. Go ahead, Paul.
sorry, Tammy. So Jordi, that is an interesting distinction that you've pointed out in the British legal system, the fact that they don't talk about religion or creed, but belief. And that's sort of a segue into a question that I wanted to ask you, which is, would you characterize your belief as a spiritual belief or as a scientific belief? In some ways, you frame your veganism as a scientific belief, something that has emerged out of evolutionary theory. And so, in a sense, you are asking, or you were asking the British legal system for for protection of your scientific belief, which is an odd idea because normally it is, spiritual or religious beliefs that are protected in society. Do you think that the general community would accept that veganism is a scientific belief? Yeah, let me start.
It's a bit more nuanced than that, because the term used in legal system in the UK is not scientific, because it's philosophical belief. And there's a distinction. So the philosophical belief is a belief that you acquire through your brain. Whether you got that through a spiritual growth or through reading books, it doesn't matter. It's something that you at one point are convinced is true. It's a synonymous will be a conviction. You are certain that something is true. How? Because a priest told you, because I read the scriptures, because you had an epiphany, because you talk to a scientist, because you make experiments yourself. It doesn't matter how. The law says if you have a conviction, that conviction should be protected no matter what. Now, if that conviction is religious, you don't need to go through any process. Automatically, you are accepted. If that conviction is not religious, so it's not based into established religion, then you need to check a little bit. So we don't want to protect something that is damaging, such as Nazis or fascism or things like that. So there is a system that filters those beliefs that might and be wrong compared with those that are okay with civilization, democracy, the rights of others, all these sort of things, which is other conditions that have to be fulfilled. Now, that means I could be pushing for this philosophical belief without making any statement of whether that has to do with science or truth based on facts. However, I do believe in science, and I'm not a spiritual in that sense. So my convictions tend to come from logical and common sense. But that was beside the point in my legal case. I could have been completely spiritual, and that would still work. I could have argued from a point of view that I had an epiphany one day, and that still would lead to the protection. But the good thing about my case is that I didn't have to explain how I got convinced, or I only had to say that it was a conviction, that it was true, and I have to prove it, saying, look, affects any aspect of my life. Many of those pages of evidence were evidence of how I manifest that veganism, what I buy, what I don't buy, all these sort of things. So those are proof that, yeah, however I managed to be convinced that is the truth, I was applying it in my life. But I did apply common sense and logic. But that means it's open to the question. The key thing for me in my case is that I use the definition of veganism of the Vegan Society, which is the official definition of veganism created in 1988. Actually, the word vegan was created in 1944 by the society, and then they worked out the definition during many decades until they finalized it in 1988, and it still is the same. So that means I didn't really have a particular type of veganism. I said, I am the vegan that uses the definition that vegans use, which is the official definition. And that's why I use the word ethical veganism. And that was key in my case, because ethical veganism is interpreted as almost as saying orthodox veganism is the one that follows the original Vegan Society definition. Because other people since have used the word vegan only meaning the diet the vegans eat and not meaning anything else. And they call themselves vegans. And to distinguish those that use this term, even if don't apply the definition completely, from those that do apply it completely, we have this word, ethical veganism, which is not my invention, that was started to be used in the 80s, just to make that distinction. An ethical vegan is the one that follows the definition properly. So they only had to say, look, I do follow that definition properly. And that's why the judge said, okay, your belief is protected. But everybody else's that follows that belief is also protected. If I had created my own personal type of veganism, only that type would be protected. But because I use the standard official definition, automatically all others who share that belief with me, even if they manifested slightly different, the judge said that, doesn't matter how you manifest it, if the belief is the same, all of you are protected. So therefore, in my case, yeah, I am a vegan that I'm vegan for logic and common sense, but somebody that is vegan for spirituality, as long as we both follow and believe the same thing, we both are protected.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up question. So as a vegan, I think I speak for a lot of vegans when I say that I'm always very interested, curious about how people come to veganism. So it really fascinated me that you came to it through a kind of scientific logic. Was that really, I mean, did you have a kind of, you know, for lack of a better word, a spiritual inclination or a kind of intuitive sense that veganism was the right way to go? And did you need, as a scientist, to find some sort of scientific justification for that? Or did you really come at it purely from a scientific point of view?
That's a good question. I would say I came out from a scientific point of view after having a spiritual experience about it. So I rationalize a spiritual experience because what I mean is I think all vegans become vegans not just for an instant of something happens. It's an accumulation of information and facts and things that it's an experience that make you realize the things that you didn't know before. And you kind of start changing things. At one point, you make a decision. I'm going to adopt this philosophy. But it's hardly ever a single event. The same with my life. Through my life, I've been accumulating information rationally that make me all push towards the direction of we should not be harming anyone and we should be protecting everyone. But there were moments, instances in my life when that jump was faster and longer than the gradual progress I've been experiencing until that point. So that I made a bigger jump because that affected me more emotionally. And you could then call this a spiritual experience. If you have an emotional experience of something that happened, you don't quite understand. If you don't quite understand yet, you have an experience in a conclusion, you can just use that term, general term, spirituality, for all those things that you don't understand and you don't care that much if you do understand or not. And it was an experience with a wasp, an insect I had, that was that spiritual event that happened to me when I was in the middle of my degree of zoology. I'm a zoologist. And I was studying social wasp. That was the subject of my PhD. And so I, as an ethologist, ethology is the science that studies animal behavior. We ethologists don't experiment with them, we observe them. So it's all about going to the wild and see the animals and learn just by looking at them. So as an ethologist of wasps, I had to go and watch wasps out there in the field. So I found a nest, and my first nest I ever attempted to study. And I approached that nest with a lot of fear because the wasp, they can sting you. And through that process, something really extraordinary happened to me. that at the time I could not understand. Now I kind of rationalize it more, but at the time it was really unbelievable. It is the fact that I approached the nest. I was fearful, but I knew already quite a lot about this species. And I knew that they have guards outside the entrance of the nest, checking who comes in and comes out, because they don't want anybody from another nest invading them. So their job, they take turns, but their job is just to raise the alarm if something dangerous happens or somebody should not be coming in. So I knew that I should pay attention to the guards, because if they raise the line, which I could see because they would move the wings in a way that I could see very fast, but I could identify it, I had to run because they would just all come out trying to sting me. So I was nervous and looking at the guard, getting close, approaching me gradually, and eventually she saw me. She looked at me. I could clearly see that she looked at me, looked down, and started to move the wings. And then there was this instant that looked like an eternity. My heart was pumping fast, in which she was judging me. She was looking at my behavior, my demeanor, and she concluded, "You're okay. You're not going to hurt me." And then she didn't raise the alarm. And the fact that a 1-inch individual had judged me so well while through my life, having born in a fascist regime in Spain, humans judge me so wrongly, that blew my mind. And how is possible that that creature is so wise and yet is the worst that everybody wants to kill or run away from? So that was a revelation. And then since then, I wanted to not just study them, but also protecting them. I realized there was an element of unfairness that I was part of, that we were treating all these other creatures so badly that had to be corrected. And that was my beginning. I didn't become vegan straight away, but it was the beginning of me leaving the country, becoming an animal protectionist in the UK, where I live now after 30 years, and eventually becoming vegan years later. But yeah, you could call that a spiritual experience, which then I rationalized because I understood why she did it. I understood all the logic of it. But as a feeling, it was an experience that was unknown for me at the time, and I valued for what it was. So I think in my case, I constantly at awe with nature and with animals, and I could call that spiritual experience. And I don't find that in conflict with me understanding why I like it or what have they done that, and not needing any deity or any supernatural phenomenon to explain what's happening.
Okay.
That's so
Thank you.
incredibly beautiful. Thank you, Jordi. You know, a couple of my friends and teachers, Dr. Shelley Ostroff, who works a lot with water and the animals, and Dr. Zach Bush, they both said the first time they were truly witnessed for who they were was through the eyes of an animal, through the eyes of a wild animal. And I believe the same things happen with myself. And Paul and I were both reading that last night. I was very moved by that incident, and also the love, you know, for your canine friend and the connection, you know, that they teach us. And even if it's and making the connection between your canine friend that you grew up with and how you were both kind of confined and imprisoned to some degree. And the freedom that comes from that is knowing that we're kind of all in it together until we're not, you know, until we're not. I would like to tell you, I really love your 3 questions that you bring into the book. When I was studying yoga for many years, I studied Sattva yoga, which means yoga for a quiet mind. And the Sattva principles are very much vegan. It's eating and living for a quiet mind. And we spent a whole weekend looking into each other's eyes and just asking one question: who are you? Who are you? And that's your first question, is who am I? You know, and then the second one is, what, help me out here.
What is this? What is this?
Yes, what is this and what will I do with it, right?
Yeah,
and you went on to say, well, it's simple. The answer is quite simple. It's ahimsa. And one of our grandmothers in the Million Vegan Grandmothers, I don't know if you've heard of Judy Carmen, but she wrote a book a few years ago called Homo Ahimsa, Who We Really Are and How We're going to Save the World. And that when we realize our true spirit is Homo Ahimsas, that we are people, not Homo sapiens, which means the intelligent one, which isn't actually true, but we're actually people of compassion, then we will probably have the answer to all 3 of those questions. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think the fundamental questions of existence, if you think in any philosophy, they all more or less dwell in either one of these three. Is an identity issue. Who I am is always, you never have an answer. If you think, my book is an attempt to answer these three questions. And I do have an answer at the end, but it's an incomplete answer. I could write in 10 years another book that will show how I progress in answering further all these three questions. I don't think you never and knowing exactly who you are, or knowing exactly what's the world around you. You always learn about things you didn't know, or knowing what you should be doing all the time. And so essentially, it's all about identity, about epistemological knowledge, and about morals and ethics, what to do. What else is there in philosophy? But what I did is I just realize that we always constantly ask these questions, but sometimes we don't even realize that we're asking them. And by not realizing that we're asking them, we miss the answer that passes by. So by reminding us all the time that these are things that interest us, we might then see answers more often and be able to catch them and incorporate them in your life and keep looking for a better answer. And the book gave me the chance to realize who I am. I'm an ethical vegan. That's who I am. That's an important part of my identity. What is this? Is a world full of other creatures like me and a lot of vegans like me, and is not unique in any respect. We all together in this. And what should I do? Ahimsa, do no harm. Simple.
Mm. And you compiled 1,200 pages to bring to court, and you spent 2 years. What did that feel like at the end of that, knowing that you actually changed the world, changed the law for us human vegans?
That's a good question, because feelings are difficult to explain. But when people say, how did you feel? The answer should be always say, I don't know, because I'm not there anymore. I felt there something, and then I unfelt it and felt something else. So I cannot really remember exactly. But I do remember when the judge was reading the verdict. It was quite unusual, because normally employment tribunal cases, you present the case, the judge goes away after a week or so, writes a written judgment and sends it to you. But when we finished all the testimonies, the judge on the spot, because the whole courtroom was full of journalists, outside, inside, was completely packed. The judge says, look, I already made my decision. I don't need to think about it. I already know. I can give you a summary judgment right now, and then I will send you the written judgment later on, a few days. And all the lawyers said, yeah, fine, no problem. And then he started giving this summary. And at one point, what he did is he read part of my statement, of my evidence, in which I describe a normal day, that an average day I have every day. I wake up in the morning, I go to the toilet, and I don't use any animal product there. I use electricity in my razor. I shave my beard at the time, which is vegan friendly, because it's from a company that doesn't use electricity from biofuels and things like that, and describing all my entire day. And when he was saying it, I was welling up. My eyes was welling up of emotion and tears, because I thought, look, this is what I do every day. And nobody's looking when I'm doing these things. Nobody's checking that I'm doing these things. I could just cheat the world and eat meat and all these sort of things when nobody's looking, and pretend to be a vegan outside, in the outside world. But yet, these things I do in my privileges that seem insignificant, look how important they are now. Then a judge there is reading them for the entire world to know. And everybody listening to what he's saying and realizing, yes, this guy does believe in this. This is not something made up. This guy applies it when nobody's looking every single day for every single decision. And the importance of that, transforming the everyday colloquial minutiae activities that you do into the biggest belief humanity can ever believe. That big jump from the small to the big, that was very emotional to me. So at the same time, I was very aware that I'm just a single person. It's me here, could have been anybody else. There's nothing important, special about me. So you're constantly, when there's so much attention, you constantly have to fight with ego, trying to build and necessary growth on your identity that you don't need. So I was very aware that there was nothing special here. It was just one person saying, I do this, and the world saying, oh, it makes sense, simple as that. But at the same time, that was huge, because all of vegans been trying to kind of send this message and normally ignore. And now here you were, a judge saying, these beliefs that you have is no less important than Christianity, than Islam, than environmentalists, than pacifism, than any other belief, philosophical or religious, is that this you believe is as important, no more, no less, as important. And nobody had ever publicly said that. So nobody had decision power and jurisdictional power. And that was huge. And that's what the world realized. That was a qualitative change, not just a quantitative change. Something has happened here. So it had been a recognition that could be the beginning of a big thing. And I think that's how I see it. I don't see it as a big achievement. I see it as a door that had been locked for millennia that suddenly opened. And we had the chance to use that door and move to the next level where we actually build the vegan world.
You, your narrative, if I may call it that, your scientific narrative, is in a sense seems to me a kind of movement from egotism to altruism. And you argue that, it begins at the, lowest level of organization with this selfish gene, as Dawkins calls it, which, he might have argued, though you mentioned that he he had some reservations about his title. He argued that we were, in some sense, evolutionarily programmed to be selfish because of these genes that want to be reproduced. But then you say that it's almost like an emergent property of the selfish gene that we are, in some sense, evolutionarily propelled towards altruism, and that in some sense our evolutionary destiny is to be altruistic. Do you see that as a kind of necessary unfolding of human nature? Do you think that if we can remove some of the obstacles to that, human beings will naturally gravitate towards a kind of altruistic world, altruistic relationships with others, including animals?
Yes, I do. And I'm so glad you mentioned this, because this is a part of my book that's often ignored. People interview me many times, they hardly ever mention this. And this is kind of an important part, because it's the fundamentals, is the biological. Essentially what I'm saying in that part of the book, that ahimsa, this belief of doing no harm, that has become a tenet of many religions like Buddhism, Jainism, etc. And it's a fundamental axiom of veganism. I'm saying this is biological. This is not cultural. This is not us creating this. This would have happened anywhere, spontaneously, in different cultures. And it did happen anywhere in different cultures. The Taoists, in Kingdom of Magda with the Jains millennia ago, and Pythagoras in Greece, all those came out from that concept. Somebody called it ahimsa at one point, but they call it different words, but the idea was the same. The idea of not harming is actually better than harming. That's what ahimsa is. And I think that is biological. It comes from nature realizing that epiphany in a way, that through the selfish gene of reproduction and trying just to make more copies of yourself and not making and preventing others to make copies, that doesn't work that well as if you do that at the same time you cooperate with others and you help each other to achieve your goals. So cooperation and getting together, that is something that has an evolutionary advantage. And that's why it appears. So it's a combination. It's almost like a yin and yang, a combination of selfishness and altruism that has driven the entire evolution of all species. We are another species, so we also fight with these two forces of egoism and altruism. But if you add more years to any evolution, I think the altruism wins always. In this battle, the altruism wins because there are more beneficiaries in that one. That you're selfish, you might win, but you're just one tiny creature. If you're altruist, all of you together might win, so you actually are more numerous than the selfish ones. So I'm sure that the vegan world will happen. I am certain of it. Probably won't happen as soon as most people wish they would, but it will eventually happen because it's in our genes. It might take a longer time than we think, and it might be quite hard to get there. It might be ups and downs, and it might not be exponential, but it will happen. Either because we, humanity, did it so wrong that we all got extinct, and then we already have a vegan world there without humans. No humans are harming anyone. Or those that survive realize that not harming others is the way forward and becomes an ahimsa attitude, ahimsa politics, I call it. So I'm certain, but the role of us living today is to make that happening as soon as possible, to minimize the time required to get to that point. And that's what we call building the vegan world. The vegan world is making that world closer every day, make it faster, doing changes in everyday's social, political, personal lives that make you closer to that world where non-harming is the default currency.
Beautiful. Thank you. Do you have any final questions, Paul, before Jordi wraps up with some more inspiration for us as we head on our way?
Well, I guess final question I would have is, you talked about this being in our biological nature, it's not a cultural thing. So do you see culture, and I'm thinking specifically of our Western culture, as in some way being an impedance to this natural development? Do you feel like the selfishness aspect of our nature is being in some way reinforced or encouraged by the current system? And would you like to see it give way to a different kind of cultural system?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I would say the modern cultures, plural, that are out there are heavily weighed on egoism and self-centeredism. But I would not say just is a West versus East issue. So I'd say this problem, you'll find it in the East as much as you find it in the West and in the North and in the South.
Mm-hmm.
It's a modern issue caused by modernity, meaning many of us have been born, a lot of technology out there, so we all are more capable to do things by ourselves without the need of the help of others, because technology allows us to avoid the need of cooperation sometimes. So you can just live in your little corner and you'll survive if you know how to do it. So that means, yeah, this is a growing culture for egocentrism, anthropocentrism, all these sort of centrism, egotistic points of view. But at the same time, the same technology allows us to communicate from one part of the world to another. And suddenly you're alone in your room talking like I'm doing right now with people in other part of the world that I would not be able to do without this technology. So we, again, that's the cooperation element appearing there. So we lose from one side, but we gain from another side. So the opportunity is always there for any step we do in one direction. The problem is because it's many more of us, it's more difficult for us to agree in doing something. It's more difficult for us to get rid of traditions because it's always going to be somebody that wants to keep them. So that means the struggle seems more difficult because there are more of us. But I think overall, when you see all the tendencies, and the last part of my book is all about that, all the trends that I can see that help or hinder that process, I am an optimist. I can see there are more things that help than hinder. So that's why I think we're going to get it. But we can't just be complacent and sit and wait for it to happen. We have to do it ourselves. We have to overcome the difficulties personally and culturally as well.
Great. Thanks very much.
And thank you, Jordi. And, as we were reading the book and we were going through some of the religions that actually were very much steeped in veganism and ahimsa. And I had the honor of studying with Dr. Gabrielle Cousins for many years and doing a master's in plant-based nutrition. And it's a modern Essene ministry. And the practices are beautiful and steeped in love and care, and compassion. And I know recently you had met in person, a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Sailesh Rao, at the premiere in London of Christspiracy. And I wonder if maybe you could just end a little bit, because it's a documentary that we really want to see everyone watch, because, you know, the religious sect in our world, I don't know, I think it's like over 60 to 70% of people are part of some religious group. And so I think it's a really important documentary for people to see, but maybe you can just share a little bit about your meeting with Dr. Rao and sharing the premiere with him. And then we will see you soon on our Convergence in a month.
No, it was great. I met him. I had talked to him many times. I actually wrote an article about him. I interviewed him years ago, but never met him face to face until that premiere. And it was great because we do have a lot in common. So we see the world similarly. He's a system engineer. I'm a scientist that I look at the world as a system engineer would do. He constantly thinking in the vegan world of the future, which I also do all the time. And he has a very similar approach of ahimsa that I do have. And so that was great. But that event, the premiere of Christspiracy, also was so important for me because that I thought was the missing link that we've been often using arguments, and the spiritual argument is often not used that much in order to persuade people to adopt the philosophy of veganism. I consider that there are 5 gateways into veganism. Animal rights is the most known of all. Environmental is often used. Health, and social justice, perhaps the newest of all, and then spirituality, which was the first one. The first vegans in history used that one. Perhaps the one used less today, and that's why people don't talk about it. And this film is precisely about that one. So it will allow people that would be more attracted to veganism through that gateway to open it, the door, and move in. And once you're in, doesn't matter the gateway you use. Once you're in, you can explore all the rooms of the vegan mansion. I use this analogy, the vegan mansion. I like it. So it's like doesn't matter which door, you explore all the rooms, and like me, you end up being a vegan for all the 5, for the animals, for the environment, for social justice, for spirituality and health. If you just become vegan today, perhaps you only know about that door. But keep moving, keep exploring. It's a process. You never end doing it. And that spirituality one, unless you are a spiritual vegan, often is ignored when in vegan outreach. And I think that that event of the premiere was an event where that door was open. So we had all these people with different spiritual and philosophical interpretations sitting together and watching somebody talking about how animals and spirituality interact and how ahimsa should actually rule that relationship. So.
And it's kind of shocking that gateway has been closed for so long, because as you said, when you were talking about that experience with the wasp, I mean, that kind of experience, that looking into the eyes of an animal and recognizing each other in some sense is, I think, at the core of our empathetic inclination to become vegan, to care for animals, to not want to hurt animals. And so, I mean, for me, that is really foundational. And that particular gateway, at least institutionally, has been closed or almost closed for so long is really, I mean, in some ways, I guess it makes sense if if the system is geared towards, meat production, et cetera, then other aspects of the system, including the religious aspects, might align themselves with that necessity. And so in some ways it's logical, but at the same time, it is such a foundational gateway to veganism that it's amazing that those impulses have been successfully dampened for so long. So I'm glad the door is hopefully opening, and that this movie will help to open it.
Yeah, and the movie itself kind of reveals why it happens. Why, without spoiling it, the movie shows you an interpretation of Christianity, other religions, and most people will be surprised to learn, because that's not what they learn in the school or in the church. That kind of tells you how it used to be and how it was corrupted through the years by the system. And a carnist system, an indoctrination of carnism, has corrupted and touched any aspect of human civilization and behavior, including religion. And then when you become vegan, basically you remove yourself from that carnist indoctrination gradually. Sometimes it's hard, and there are relics in your brain still, but that's your effort, is to free yourself from carnism. And when you do that with Christianity, you see what those that produced the film Discovery found. So I don't want to reveal it, but it is an interesting revelation, because he's removing carnism from Christianity, what's left. So then you watch the documentary and you learn what's left, which is interesting.
Beautiful. Yeah. I remember going to see the big motion picture, Noah, and I watched it with a friend of mine who grew up as a Christian, and I didn't. And at one scene, Noah's son was asking, how come these hunters were killing these animals? And Noah said, because they've forgotten. So I asked my friend after, I said, did you get that? Like, they were vegan. And he goes, I don't remember that part. So for me, it was just like, we have this ability to block things out we don't want to hear. He was a meat eater, and it was just like many years ago when this motion picture came out. So what we're doing here on this podcast is we're having conversations about the things that society has blocked out, not wanted to look at, and not wanted to really ask the hard questions and go deep. So thank you, Jordi, for doing that, putting it into words, putting it into writing, putting it into your interviews, and continuing to do your work. I can see the passion and love in your eyes, and I see the same look I see in so many brilliant people like you and Sailesh and Dr. Will Tuttle, and it's too many to mention, my good friends and grandmothers. Nothing can put out that light. So thank you for being that light in the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.